Hello everyone, this is Scarzig, and welcome to the basics of Runeterra. In this video, I take the cards that we get for free from the starter decks, combine them into a new list, Ionia and Demacia, and then I play a quick match against the AI. I take the opportunity to just explain my plays and just the basic mechanics and turn-to-turn progression of the game as a walkthrough for players who are not familiar with card games or not familiar with Runeterra in the slightest. So if that sounds like you, then we'll jump right in. The first thing we need to talk about when it comes to Legends of Runeterra is the opening mulligan. In Runeterra, you start with 4 cards in hand, and you have to choose which ones that you would like to shuffle back into your deck and draw replacements. One of the basic rules of thumb when it comes to a mulligan in a card game is to get rid of your expensive cards and keep your less expensive ones or your really powerful cards that you need for the specific matchup. So we don't want to keep the Empyrean because it's 7 mana. If we don't mulligan it, it's just going to sit in our hand for 6 rounds, and we won't be able to cast it until 7, and we need to have more options. Garen is the same way, where he is very strong, but is just going to sit in our hand for several rounds. We want things to do in the early game to counteract what our opponent is doing, so we're going to try to set up like this. We have Cithria of Cloudfield, which is a fantastic play. The 1 here is the mana cost of the card, and that is what you start with in this game. So we can just click on the card to know that we're going to mulligan it and then hit OK. We're also playing against the AI because there is no time limit. It'll give me as much time as I need to explain the different mechanics of the game. So this is very interesting. We at the beginning of the round, both players draw a card. So besides your 4 opening cards, you do draw 1 more card on the first turn. So you have an additional chance to get something to potentially play on the first turn, or just something to help you out in the early game. We were initially going to play Cithria of Cloudfield for 1 mana. However, we do have the Fleet Feather Tracker now, which is also 1 mana. And its text is, when you summon another ally, grant me Challenger. Normally, in Legends of Runeterra, you choose which units you want to attack, and then your opponent gets to decide which units of theirs are going to be defending against each unit. It's very cool where it lets the defender choose the trades. So you don't get, rolled over too much when your opponent gets a very aggressive advantage on you early, like you see in games like Hearthstone, for example. However, Challenger allows us to choose the enemy blocker for the Fleet Feather Tracker, but in order to give him Challenger, we need to make sure the Fleet Feather Tracker is in play first, and then summon a second ally. So we play the Fleet Feather Tracker, and our opponent summons the Inspiring Mentor, another 1 mana card. If I wanted to, I could go into combat. I don't have Challenger, so I can't drag the Inspiring Mentor up to block the Fleet Feather Tracker. And my opponent could choose to still trade if they wanted to, or they could choose not to and take 2 damage. I, however, want to keep the Fleet Feather Tracker alive, so I'm going to pass and choose to not attack. Even though I'm not attacking this turn, I still lose the attack token. It goes to my opponent's side, and this switches every round. And so now, it is my opponent's first action. Whoever gets to take the first action changes from round to round. I took the first action last time, then it's my opponent's turn. They play the Sparring Student for 1 mana, and then I can go ahead and play Cithria of Cloudfield for 1 mana. So she comes down, and you can see the effect happens. Fleet Feather Tracker gains the Challenger keyword, and I have 1 mana left over to spare here. My opponent spends their 2nd mana to summon the Navori Blade Scout, and I have no actions I can take, so I pass. And then my opponent uses their action to initiate combat. They decide which units they want to attack with, and then, as I stated before, I get to choose which units I would like to defend with. So I can block a bunch of damage like this. However, I still want to keep the Fleet Feather Tracker alive. Actually, this is fine. Typically with Fleet Feather Tracker, you essentially want to use it to be able to deal 2 damage to something of your choosing, something specific. And because my opponent's attacking in here, I'm basically getting to deal damage to the unit I would like. So There is an argument to be made for taking this trade, for making this block here, or saving the Fleet Feather Tracker. You can see over here for Cytherea of Cloudfield, because she has 2 attack and 2 power, the Inspiring Mentor only has 1 attack, so Cytherea of Cloudfield will take just 1 damage and still survive. I cannot block the Navori Blade Scout because it has elusive, and elusive units can only be blocked by other elusive units. So my opponent deals 2 damage, and the Sparring Student has +1/+1. Whenever you summon an ally, he gets boosted in his stats, but that only lasts for 1 round. You can see that here on the text. It's only for 1 round. So next round, this will just become a 1/1 and won't be as threatening. But I am going to go ahead and take care of it now, because the Fleet Feather Tracker, if I were to challenge it, would still die because it only has 1 HP, and so this prevents me from taking 2 damage and destroys a really important unit on my opponent's side. And then we just have the block here with Inspiring Mentor. If you hover over your opponent's deck, you can see what champions they're playing. My opponent is playing Zed in their deck, and I have Zed, Garen, and Lux. This deck is simply comprised of the cards that you get for free from the starter decks of Ionia and Demacia. Now, because my opponent has Zed, which has 2 HP, it is a good target for me to potentially kill with the Fleet Feather Tracker. However, after combat, the action comes to me, and because I will now be on 3 mana, and I'm attacking, it gives me the opportunity to play my Zed. Now Zed has quick attack, and that means that while attacking, he strikes before its blocker. As we saw in the last combat, Cytherea of Cloudfield and the Inspiring Mentor attacked one another, and Cytherea dealt 2 damage, and then the Inspiring Mentor dealt 1 damage to Cytherea, and that damage happens simultaneously. But with quick attack, Zed will strike before its blocker, and that means that Zed, if his 3 attack kills the enemy unit, he won't take any damage because his damage goes through first. So Zed is very, very powerful on offense. And so now my opponent, after combat, the action goes to the opponent like we saw last round. I used my action to play Zed. They played the Inspiring Mentor. Then I attacked, and then it's their turn to do an action. In Runeterra, you and your opponent are alternating taking actions, playing cards, and so then they play the Herald of Spring. And the Inspiring Mentor has given it +2 attack. Both Inspiring Mentors were both used to buff this card. So now it is a 4/2, and it has the support ability. The way support works is that in combat, it will buff the unit to its right. In Legends of Runeterra, the attacks and combat resolve from left to right. So these units will attack each other first, and then these units will attack each other first. You can only have 6 units in play on your bench, and 6 units in combat at one time, but it all resolves from left to right. So if my opponent goes into combat with Herald of Spring, whatever unit is played to the right will gain lifesteal. That is its support ability, and that lifesteal will last for the round. So I have no actions, I pass. You can see my unspent mana goes into this little marker down here. This is your spell mana bank. Any unspent mana for the round up to 3 refills your spell mana, and it gives you a way to, you don't get punished so hard for not spending all of your mana or not being able to play any cards for that round. Sometimes you draw cards that are just too expensive and you can't play them yet, but you get some spell mana to help mitigate that so you don't lose everything. And potentially you can cast some of your more expensive spells a little early by using your unspent mana from previous turns. It's a really interesting mechanic. So my opponent, instead of attacking, takes the opportunity to play the Kinko Wayfinder, and the Kinko Wayfinder's ability is an allegiance effect. When you summon it, it gains the allegiance bonus if the top card of your deck matches this card's region. And you can see what regions are in your opponent's deck right up here next to their name. Like you can see down here, this is the Demacian symbol, and this is the Ionian symbol, and my opponent's playing a deck that just has Ionia in it. So that means that the Kinko Wayfinder, which is an Ionian Allegiance card, will always have its ability happen. So these two got summoned directly from the deck. Very, very cool. I will go ahead and play the Scaled Snapper. The Scaled Snapper's ability is that when you summon it, you can choose for it to be a 5-2 or a 2-5. And I want it to be a 2-5 here, so that I have a high HP blocker for my opponent's board. So we can have Cithria of Cloudfield block here. She still does 2 damage to the Herald of Spring, but the 4 attack doesn't go on to, like, say, the Scaled Snapper or something like that. So this is really good for me. The Scaled Snapper has an opportunity to block some stuff. I can block this damage if I'd like, but the Kinko Wayfinder has lifesteal, and this won't even finish it off because I only have 2 attack. So I'm going to take the opportunity for the Scaled Snapper to simply block the Navori Blade Scout to prevent 2 damage directly to me. And Zed can block the Nimble Poro. So this is one of the other nuances of Quick Attack. The Nimble Poro will still deal its damage first, but because it doesn't kill Zed here, because he has 2 HP, Zed will still deal its damage to the Nimble Poro. So we can get that out of the way. So combat happens from left to right. This attack happens first. Then Kinko Wayfinder hits. The lifesteal happens so that they heal their Nexus. Lifesteal means that the damage that the unit deals will heal the opponent's Nexus, and then the rest of the combat resolves down the line. And now after combat, the defending player gets the next action, and I will pass. It is now my turn. You can see with my unspent mana filling up my spell mana, I have 7 mana in total, but I can only use 5 of this mana to summon units. So if I summon Garen for 5 mana, then I'll have 2 mana left over to play spells, which I don't have any 2 mana spells in hand. If I decide not to summon Garen or perhaps summon the Shadow Assassin, I will have 4 mana left over, so I can also cast the Twin Disciplines if I would like. And it's going to come up to, the particular board state, the matchup, and your personal experience about what play you would like to make, because I can simply just attack here immediately before my opponent gets to do anything, right? Because if I play a unit instead of attacking, it gives my opponent a chance to summon something. And so I think I will just summon the Shadow Assassin. She is elusive. Again, she can only be blocked by other elusive units, but when she's summoned, I get to draw a card. And my opponent has another Kinko Wayfinder, which allows them to summon 2 more 1-cost units from their deck. That is the Kinko Wayfinder's ability. So now they have some extra units to block, but now I can also attack. Zed, if you remember, summons a Living Shadow to attack alongside. So then my opponent just goes completely defensively and blocks everything. You can see here, because the Navori Blade Scout has elusive, they can block the Shadow Assassin. And so the 2 attack will kill the Shadow Assassin with only 2 HP. But I can use Twin Disciplines here to give +3 HP to the Shadow Assassin so that she survives killing the Navori Blade Scout. And then I get to keep her alive. And again, we don't have anything to do, so we pass. Our 1 unspent mana that was left over refills our spell mana. So now it's my turn again, and I can just summon Lux here. I have 6 mana here, and Lux costs 6, so I can just play her down. Lux has Barrier. Barrier lasts for the round that it is created or granted to the unit, and it negates the next instance of damage that the unit would take. So that could be from a spell that deals damage or from combat. So you can see the Herald of Spring uses its support ability to give lifesteal to the Green Glade Scout. And Green Glade Scout's ability is that when it strikes, aka deals damage to a unit like that, it reduces the cost of the most expensive unit in your hand by 1, but my opponent's hand is empty. So now we get to be defensive here. Lux can block the Sparring Student, even though it has 3 attack. It doesn't matter because Lux has Barrier, and Lux's 4 attack will kill the Sparring Student. To remove that threat from the board, we also have the Scaled Snapper, which can trade up into the Herald of Spring. Because the Herald of Spring has this support ability, we want to make sure that we remove it from the board to keep my opponent from repeatedly casting Lifesteal. And because we protected the Shadow Assassin last round, we do have another... we preserved her as a blocker, so we have another unit that we can use to destroy the Greenglade Lookout. And again, we don't want to block with Zed because he only has 1 HP, so he will die. And we want to keep Zed alive because he's a very powerful unit, especially on offensive turns, which at the end of the round, because my opponent had the attack token comes back to me, and so then I can attack. And again, at the beginning of each round, we both draw a card, we both refill our mana, and then gain +1 mana. So now I'm up to 7, and that gives me the opportunity to cast the Empyrean if I would like. We have a bunch of plays that we can do, like we have Twin Disciplines for 3, plus Laurent Blade Keeper for 4, so that's 7 mana in total. We can play 2 cards, 2 smaller cards, or 1 big card, and that's all going to come down to, as I said, your personal experience, what's going on in the game at that particular moment. I'm going to play the Laurent Blade Keeper, because it grants an ally +2 attack and +2 HP, and so we can give that to Zed. So now he has 5 attack and 3 HP, and because of his ability, he also passes those buffs along to his Living Shadow. So we can go ahead and attack here. So my opponent only has 2 defenders against my 4 blockers. And the card from their hand, the spell from their hand, was Will of Ionia, which they can cast here in the middle of combat. This recalls a unit. Recall returns a unit to its owner's hand and removes all effects applied to it, and that's buffs or debuffs. And that's a fast spell, meaning that I have the opportunity to, if I would like to, I could resolve another spell before this one happens, like Twin Disciplines, if I wanted to give extra attack to Zed or something along those lines. But there's no need for me to do that. Lux simply just goes back to my hand. And because Zed struck the Nexus, he now levels up. When he or his Living Shadows have struck the Nexus twice, he becomes leveled up Zed, and now his Living Shadows gain his stats and keywords. So now the Living Shadow will also have quick attack, and then he gets a nice little stat boost as well whenever they level up. So my opponent has no cards left in hand, they can't take any actions, so they pass, and I also pass. I have 3 unspent mana, but you can only have up to 3 banked spell mana, so that 4th mana does disappear, but now we have a lot of mana to work with. And my opponent attacks here, and I can simply block if I would like, or I could just keep Zed behind in case this card that my opponent drew gives extra attack power or something to the Kinko Wayfinder. They could potentially kill Zed. So because he's my most powerful card and main attacker, I can just choose not to block and keep him alive. And I'll take 2 damage here to my Nexus, but because I'm in a much stronger position than my opponent, I have this big attacker in play, and I have a lot of cards left in my hand that I can still take actions and do stuff. Taking a little bit of damage here in exchange for that is a very, very good position for me. So I just simply assign the Laurent Blade Keeper to block, and then we hit block. My opponent does have the opportunity to take an action before combat fully resolves, and they choose to use Shadow Shift, which will send the Kinko Wayfinder back to their hand and summon a Living Shadow in its place. So the 3/2 kills the Kinko Wayfinder. What? Hang on, did that bug out? The Kinko Wayfinder is supposed to go back to their hand. That's weird. AI, Riot Spaghetti Code. Oh, I see. Yeah, so it was there. It was just a visual bug where I couldn't see the last card in their hand. Okay, that was weird. So, because they sent the Kinko Wayfinder back to their hand, they're able to resummon it and activate its Allegiance ability again. So they play that, and then they get more Navori Blade Scouts and Nimble Poros to help them defend against my offensive turn. And because I have 8 mana, I can cast Garen, which costs 5 mana, and then the Scaled Snapper, which costs 3 mana, and then I get to keep my 3 spell mana still. This will still just, you get to hold on to it as long as you want, as long as you aren't casting any spells. So now it is my turn once again. I can simply attack in, and because Zed creates a Living Shadow, it would be 4 attackers versus 4 defenders, and my opponent would just block everything to keep me from winning. But what I can do is summon the Empyrean, which is just a really big unit that has elusive, and it can only be blocked by other elusive units. So now I can attack like this. Zed creates a Living Shadow, and the Empyrean cannot be blocked because my opponent doesn't have an elusive unit. And so you can see how when you have more cards in your hand and more units on the board, you can just keep pressuring your opponent, forcing them to defend against your attacks until they just run out of defenders and you win the game. Of course, my opponent having like 1 card in hand means that I could press my advantage even further with single combat, etc. But I'm just trying to show you that fundamentally, as you keep just attacking your opponent over and over and over again, when you have the numbers advantage on attack, they'll eventually crumble. And so now we have just a bunch of units. We can use our first action again, like I've been demonstrating. When the round starts and you have the attack token, you can play a unit if you'd like, but you have the opportunity that as immediately for your first action, you can initiate combat. And this is what's referred to as an open attack. My opponent only has 1 blocker against 5 attackers, so there's no way that they can protect themselves from their Nexus health getting depleted, and that's the win. Alright everyone, thank you so much for tuning in today. If you have any further questions as a new player, please let me know in the comments below, and I will be able to address those right then in the comments or potentially in a future follow-up to this video. Runeterra is a very complex and nuanced game, and I know that just some heavy analytical gameplay against the AI isn't going to be able to cover everything that a new player might want. So let me know what other things you would like me to cover, and I will see you next time.